Hello everyone, Silent K here. I'm a little bit stuffed up, but we have a lot of cards to go over, so I'm just gonna have to put up with it. Before that though, a few quick corrections from last video. First, Tristan of the Round Table was listed as a commander. It's since been corrected that he will be an officer. That doesn't really change his score though. Even though he doesn't mess up the Maid Leader pulls for Banner Sword, he doesn't really fit into that deck, and that's the only deck that can reliably keep a commander on the board, so he is going to remain the same. Also, Gravekeeper Sonya, I said was a good anti-hard removal ward, overlooking the fact that she's only protected against damage from spells, so she is still susceptible to hard removal. This does greatly affect her score though. Since the 5-drop slot is highly competitive in Havencraft, and being able to be hard removed makes her a lot less useful as a ward, it brings her score down to overall -1. And finally, Heavenly Aegis obviously can't be affected by Guardian Sun since it can't be affected by any cards. But more importantly, when he was added to the Shadowverse portal website, his card text was changed, and he now reads, "Can't be damaged, can't be targeted by spells and effects other than those that relate to attack or defense," which means that he should be able to be affected by effects that are not targeted, such as Tribunal and Nemesis Decree. But then in parentheses, there's, for example, this follower can't be destroyed or banished by spells and effects, which makes it sound like the old card text, which means he's immune to all effects, aside from those that change his attack or defense. So it's a complete contradiction. I can only assume that the first card text was correct, and someone along the lines thought that it was confusing even though it wasn't, and they decided to change it to this, even though this is a complete contradiction and makes no sense whatsoever. So I'm going to leave his score the same, assuming that the first card text was correct. But like I said, he cannot be affected by Guardian Sun, so you can't give him ward, but he's still extremely strong and impossible to remove, so his score remains the same. Moving on to the new cards. First up for Bloodcraft, Stolen Life. 6 mana spell, deal 3 damage to an enemy follower, then give +3/+3 to a random allied follower. This is basically a more expensive win more version of Night Horde. Night Horde being 4 mana, summon 2 forest bats, and then deal damage equal to the number of forest bats you have. So you're basically gaining +2/+2, and dealing a minimum of 2 damage, more than 2 damage if you already have forest bats in play, for 4 mana. So even if you're behind, you're putting stuff on the board. With Stolen Life, if you have nothing on the board, then you're not going to be able to buff anything. So it's 6 mana, deal 3 damage, which is pretty terrible. This type of card would be okay for an aggro deck, aside from the fact that it's way too expensive to put in an aggro deck, so overall pretty terrible, -2. Next up, Belphegor Legendary, 4 mana, 4/4. Fanfare, draw 2 cards. Deal damage to your leader until their defense drops to 10 if Vengeance is not active for you. So if you compare this to Blood Pact with a follower attached, and you kind of do some creative math, it's a pretty good deal if you spend about 3 HP to play her. She gets less good the more HP you spend, but she also gets better with Vengeance and Bloody Mary synergy. She's an extremely good card for all archetypes. If you're playing an aggressive deck, you obviously need more cards, and you're doing a lot of self-damage with cards like Blood Wolf and Razor Claw anyway, so as long as you save her until you start getting around the 10 HP mark, you're going to get those cards for free, and you're going to put a follower on the board, which gives you more fuel to keep fighting. And in a slower control deck, you'll be able to hold on to her until you have some sort of synergy going. You can either knock yourself down into Vengeance and then play a Drain follower and give yourself a heal, or you can combo her with Bloody Mary, something like that. Overall, extremely good card, +2. Next, Frogbat, 3 mana 2/2. At the end of your turn, gain +1/+0. So going into your opponent's turn, this will be a vanilla 3/2, and it basically has no potential to grow. Your opponent's just going to remove it, which makes it significantly worse than many existing 3-drops. Even for a budget option, this isn't a good card. There are a lot of better options. Overall, -2. Next, Soul Dominator, 7 mana 4/6, Storm. Whenever another follower is destroyed, gain +1/+0. This is basically an Implanter for 1 more mana and +1 attack. And high HP Storm followers are always useful for burst and versatility. If you need to clear a ward, you can usually kill it and then have the follower stick around. Overall, +1. On to Dragoncraft, Windreader Zell. 2 mana 2/2, Evolve, give an allied follower Storm if Overflow is active for you. Basic 2/2 for 2, and if you evolve him, he has pretty good combo potential. Dragoncraft already has a lot of Storm followers for the late game, so it's not like it really needs this, but it could be useful for some fun decks. For example, giving Servant of Darkness Storm, although that is a turn 9 play and you do need an evil point, so make sure your deck has Olivia if you're going to try that out. Overall +1. Next, Phoenix Rider Aina, 6 mana 1/5, Storm, Fanfare, gain +1/+0 for each other follower in play, so that includes both yours and your opponent's followers, which makes it pretty easy to get at least Implancer stats out of this, if not better. And Rip Forte, because like I said earlier, high HP Storm followers are pretty useful. You have the versatility of being able to hit face or clear a ward and keep this on the board, something which Forte with her 1 health isn't very good at doing. Overall +1. Next, Dragon's Nest, 1 mana amulet. At the start of your turn, restore 2 defense to your leader, draw a card, and destroy this amulet if Overflow is active for you. Now hopefully I don't have to explain this to anyone, but all 3 of these effects are under the same trigger. A few crazy people on the internet thought that you could get 12 healing and 6 card draws for 1 mana with this card, and then it would destroy itself after Overflow was active. No. This amulet sits there doing nothing for 6 turns, and then once Overflow is active, you get 1 draw, 1 heal, and then it's destroyed. Which makes it a super delayed insight without any spell boost synergy. Not that there's any spell boosting in Dragoncraft anyway, but that's beside the point. Basically, this card reads, reduce your hand and board size by 1 until Overflow is active for you. Sounds great. I can't see a single use for this card. It is complete and utter garbage. Worst card in the set so far. Overall -3. Next, Aqua, 3 mana 1/1. Fanfare, summon a Megalorca. Megalorca is of course a 2/2, so you get above average stats. You get 6 stats for 3 mana. And it does have Megalorca synergy, which could be relevant if such a deck came around. Overall +1. On to Forestcraft. First up, Dryad, 2 mana 1/2, Clash. Give the enemy follower -1/-0. This is an interesting effect, although not very useful for Forestcraft playstyles, unless the meta is entirely bats, fairies, and other 1-attack followers. In most matchups against Forestcraft though, a lot of other classes will hold on to their 1/2s, like their Skullcradle Widows, their Ivory Dragons and whatnot for fairy killing, so this does shut down those types of cards. This card also doesn't die to any 2-attack followers regardless of their health. On the first clash it takes 1 damage, and on the second it takes 0 damage. So like I said, it is an interesting effect overall. I just don't see it synergizing with current Forest playstyles. On a pure value standpoint though, I'll give it an overall of 0. Next, Vist Elf Butler, 4 mana 2/5, Ward. Whenever you play a Forestcraft follower that costs at least 6 play points, subtract 3 from the cost of this card. Looking at tempo mid-range Forestcraft decks, the Cynthia deck does only run 1 6-cost follower, and that's Cynthia. So Vist could protect Cynthia, but you typically want a board ready to attack when you play her, and 1 activator in the deck for Vist isn't enough. So this would be a decent card in a slower Forestcraft deck, but like I've said in the Darkness Evolved expansion reviews and in the Bahamut expansion reviews, slow Forestcraft decks just aren't a thing. You do have your Wolfbolt deck and your Rose Queen deck, but they're not really extremely competitive or see a lot of play. The main reason probably being that Roach is just way too efficient for a slow deck to be useful. When you can make a combo deck or a mid-range deck and throw Roach in and have 2 or 3 win conditions all in one deck and have it be effective, efficient, and competitive, there's just no reason to take the Roach out and make a slower deck. In the past I reviewed these cards that are good for slower decks just based on their own merit, so I think I'll stick with that tradition and just give it a 0 since it is a fair value card. But as I said before, these sorts of cards probably won't see play until some sort of change comes along that allows slower Forestcraft decks to be viable. Next up, Hakuna, Brave and Small. 2 mana 2/2, Evolve, gain +2/+2 if at least 3 cards were played this turn. It's a pretty good buff, and it's pretty easy to proc. Since this is not a Fanfare, it means that the card played does count, so you just have to play 2 cards before this one. Not only that, it's an Evolve, so you don't even have to technically play the cards this turn. You could play this and then put it behind a ward, and then next turn play 3 cards and evolve this, if it's still on the board. Not likely, but it's possible. So you get a pretty decent buff, and it's not difficult to proc. You could play 2 fairies and play this on turn 4 and evolve it for a 6/6 and 2 1/1s. Pretty good value. Overall, +1. Next, Beetle Warrior, 3 mana 2/3. Fanfare, gain +1/+1 and Storm if at least 2 other cards were played this turn. This makes the 3rd Storm card for Forest, and it's a pretty decent aggro card. You can proc it pretty easily with a couple of fairies on turn 5. Overall, +1. On to Havencraft Dr John, Legendary, 6 mana 5/5. Fanfare, deal 2 damage to all other followers, then give +2/+0 to all other followers. I do like the flavor of this card. You go from Jean d'Arc to Dark John, and for 2 mana less, it takes both of the effects from the other card and makes both of them double-sided. Pretty cute. This card will end games. It might end them in a glorious mid-range finisher, or it might end them in hilarious memes, but it will end them. Memes aside, this is a pretty good card. You do get to choose when to play it, so obviously you want to choose a time when you do the most damage to your opponent's board and gain the most benefit to your board. And it comes in at the exact right time at 6 mana when you're guaranteed to have an evolve point. So you should be able to deal with anything that they have on the board at the time. Pretty good card. Overall, +1. Next up, Zoe, Queen of Goldania, 3 mana 3/4. Whenever this follower attacks, deal 2 damage to a random allied follower. Deal 2 damage to your leader instead if there are no other allied followers in play. This is a weird effect for Havencraft. You'd think it was a Bloodcraft card at first. So it has a pretty significant drawback, and it gains +1/+1 over standard power curve. For Havencraft, that's a pretty strong card on curve, since you most likely have a Beast Call Aria on the board, which isn't going to take any damage anyway. So while you're waiting for your Beast Call to pop, you can trade with a few things pretty easily with Zoe. Much less useful in the mid or late game though, when she starts attacking your own stuff instead of dealing face damage. It's a bit of a trade-off, so we'll give it an overall 0. Next up, Pure Healer, 4 mana 3/3. Fanfare, restore 2 defense to an ally. Enhance 6, restore 2 defense to all allies instead. So this is a better addition to Alana Haven than Frog Cleric, which I reviewed kinda poorly in the last set, and some people did try to use it anyway. Alana Haven isn't doing very well to begin with, and I don't think Frog Cleric was a very good addition to that deck. But this is a little less good outside of Alana Haven, since it only gains 1 stat over Healing Angel. On the plus side over Healing Angel though, you can target your followers instead of yourself, which means it can be better for trading. It has a few trade-offs. Overall 0. Next, Mist Shaman, 2 mana 2/2. Fanfare, give an allied follower resistance to targeted enemy spells and effects. This is potentially a very powerful combo card, as was the case with Gravekeeper Sonia. When I thought she had this effect, she was a +1 card, and when I realized she was only resistant to damage, she dropped down 2 points to -1. And that's sort of how strong this effect can be in the right circumstances. So in a slower deck like a Guardian Sun deck, you could combo this onto one of your wards, and it becomes very removal resistant. Or in a more aggressive deck, you could put this on your follower when your opponent's board is empty, and it just makes it a little more difficult to deal with. Very useful card, overall +1. Onto Roomcraft, Enchanted Library, 2 mana Amulet, countdown 2, at the end of your turn put a random spell from your deck into your hand. Pretty basic card draw, not much to say about it. This is going to make slower combo decks a little more consistent. You draw 2 for 1, and you specifically draw the spells that you need for spell boosting. Useful, overall +1. Next up, Enchanted Sword, 7 mana spell, give an allied follower +2/+2. Subtract 0 from the cost of this card. Spell boost, subtract 1 more. Even if you spell boost this down to a cheap cost or for free, it's pretty unremarkable. It's just a basic buff spell. It could be useful in a more aggressive deck like Daria, but if you play Daria, know that the consistency of that deck is razor thin. It is pretty consistent as an aggro deck, but if you started throwing cards like this in, its consistency is going to drop a lot. Also, this is a horrible top deck. So overall -2. Next up, Word Wielder Ginger, Legendary, 9 mana 4/4. Fanfare, change the cost of all followers in your hand to 0. Allied followers can't attack the enemy leader. Allied followers and amulets, Fanfare, Necromancy, Enhance, and Earthright abilities that activate upon being played from the hand will not activate. These effects will last until the end of the turn this card is played. What a mouthful. As advertised, Word Wielder is one of the wordiest cards yet. So basically it's a card that promotes follower spam on turn 9, but at the same time it denies all combo potential and all burst potential, since nothing can attack face and nothing has any Fanfare or Earthright abilities or anything like that. So I'm not really seeing the use of it. It's basically a much slower, much worse Daria. If you want follower spam, you'll just spell boost Daria and play her on like turn 6 or 7 with followers that can attack face. And most of the Daria followers don't have fanfares or any special abilities anyway, so that's what you're getting when you play Ginger. There could be a couple of minor combos. I just don't see any potency in this card, and for 9 mana you gotta have some potency. Overall -1. Next, Freshman Lou. 2 mana 1/1, Fanfare, put a random card with Spell Boost from your deck into your hand. Kinda like Enchanted Library, but it's a more specific fetch, and it's only 1 for 1. Overall 0. Onto Shadowcraft, Myth of the Underworld, Legendary, 4 mana 3/4, Fanfare, your Necromancy effects cost 0 shadows until this follower leaves the area. This could be a decent combo card in either a Deathly Tyrant deck as an alternate to Midnight Haunt, or in some kind of Necromancy Zoo deck, along with another card we're about to look at. Necromancy Zoo isn't a deck that currently exists, but for example it would run a lot of Shadow Generation followers as well as Necromancy followers that generate more followers, like Skeleton Fighter, Apprentice Necromancer, and Zombie Buccaneer. Seems pretty decent. Overall +1. Next, Little Soul Squasher, 2 mana 2/2, Necromancy 4, destroy an evolved enemy follower. Slightly expensive on the Necromancy and kinda narrow scope since it has to be an evolved enemy follower. For 2 mana and 1 shadow, you can kill most evolved followers with an Undying Resentment, and Undying Resentment is still flexible enough to kill something else that's not evolved, but Little Soul Squasher is still pretty fair value, so we'll just give it an overall 0. You don't really expect much out of a 2 mana 2/2 to begin with. Next up, Grave Desecration, 2 mana Amulet. At the end of your opponent's turn, use Necromancy 4, summon a zombie. This is the other card I was talking about with Myth of the Underworld, which might be good in a Necromancy Zoo deck. If you generate a lot of shadows and get some free zombies, it's not too bad. I'm specifically referencing a non-existent Necromancy Zoo deck because it's typically a waste of shadows. If you're constantly spending 4 shadows on zombies, then you're not going to be able to use them for an activated Foul Tempest or Death Breath. But this amulet's not as bad as it seems at first. Since it activates at the end of your opponent's turn instead of the start of your turn, you're basically getting a zombie with Storm instead of just a zombie, which isn't too shabby. Overall 0. Next, Immortal Fame, 7 mana 4/5. Fanfare, summon 2 whites. Last words, put a white king in your hand and change its cost to 0. This isn't terrible value, but it's a slow card, and it's mostly vanilla. And when you compare it to existing 7-drops, as well as the new 7-drop we're getting, Demon Lord Ektar, it comes up a little short, so overall -1. Next, Dead Moon Disciple, 1 mana 1/1, Fanfare, give an allied follower the ability to ignore ward. Not exactly a useful buff in general, but it is better than Ethereal Form in a Deathly Tyrant deck. You can do a 1-turn combo of Deathly Tyrant, Midnight Haunt, and Dead Moon Disciple for 13 damage. Also, it does have a follower attached. One reason you couldn't run 3 copies of Ethereal Form in a Deathly Tyrant deck was because it's basically a dead card until you actually need it to combo. At least with Dead Moon Disciple you can drop it if you have an extra one, or if you're up against a deck that doesn't run any wards anyway. Overall +1 specifically for the Deathly Tyrant deck. Onto Swordcraft. Gawain of the Round Table, Legendary, 4 mana 3/4. Whenever this follower attacks, subtract 1 from the cost of all commanders in your hand. Enhance 6, gain +1/+1 and rush. Please note, Albert is a commander, but cost reductions only affect the base cost, not the enhanced cost, so you don't have to worry about any turn 8 Alberts double smorking your face. Rest assured. That said, this is a good value card if you have the right hand, but it's nothing really game breaking. You can pull off a turn 5 Otohime, and you can play a couple of other control cards a little earlier than usual. So it's a good card, but a fair card. Overall +1. Next up, Spring Cleaning, 1 mana amulet, countdown 3. At the end of your turn, randomly discard one of the highest cost cards in your hand, then draw a card. This is a great card for discard Dragoncraft. Oh wait, this is a terrible card for Swordcraft. It's a terrible card in general. You would never want this effect. It's garbage. Some less experienced players might play a control Swordcraft deck and end up with a bricked hand once in a while and say, oh wait, maybe this card would be good for that situation. You just play Spring Cleaning and then your bricked hand reshuffles and you have playable cards. Fantastic. No, it doesn't work that way. I would love to take the time to explain why, but it would take a long time. So maybe I'll throw up some text on the screen, and if you want to pause the video and read it, you can do that. But this is a terrible card in all situations. Overall, -3. Next, Naval Guard Simone, 2 mana 2/2, enhance 6, gain +3/+3, and ward. It's not terrible value, but for a sword follower, it is extremely underwhelming. Overall, -1. Next, Luminous Mage, 5 mana 2/3, Fanfare, summon a Luminous Knight. Evolution points won't be used when you evolve allied commanders. So Luminous Knight is obviously the 2/1, which when evolved gives +1/+0 to all other allied followers for that turn only. So when you break it down, you basically get a 2/3, a 3/2 with Rush, and +1/+0 to your board for one turn, which is decent value but not quite as amazing as the card text leads you to believe with free evolution points. Obviously your 2/3 is going to be removed quite quickly, so you'll probably only get the free evolution point for that one turn. And this card does have some healthy competition in the 5 slot, so as good as it is, it's just going to get an overall 0. And that's being generous. When you compare it to Aventblader and Monica and Albert, it's kind of a -1. But since those cards are extremely good and this one's still pretty good, I'll just give it the benefit of the doubt. Next, Support Cannon, 5 mana amulet. Whenever an allied commander is in play, deal X damage to a random enemy follower. X equals the attack of the commander. If there are no enemy followers in play, deal X damage to the enemy leader instead. So you're going to drop major tempo just playing this card, and then even if you do get it safely on the board, it's going to be kind of difficult to use. You just basically skip turn 5, so you give your opponent 2 turns to build a board. And then even though you do get free damage if you play a commander the next turn, it's not likely to be able to kill whatever they just played, since they had 5 or 6 mana to play something. So they're going to summon like a 4/5 or a 5/6, and you're going to play like a Sage Commander or a Notohime or an Albert or something. Nothing with 6 attack anyway, so you're probably going to have to do additional damage to whatever the support cannon hits. For a 5 mana amulet, you need like guaranteed value, and I don't see this giving guaranteed value. You have to play commanders consistently every single turn to get damage out of it, and that damage has to actually count for something, which means killing things that wouldn't otherwise be killed by your stuff. Overall, -1. And finally, the neutral cards. First, Grimnir, War Cyclone, 3 mana 2/3, ward. Enhance 10, deal 1 damage to all enemies 4 times. It's fair value for 3 mana, and the enhance effect is kinda neat, but it doesn't really add anything to the score. By turn 10, the game could very well be over. The wording is also curious, deal 1 damage to all enemies 4 times. In a game like Hearthstone, that would matter, since there are a lot of cards that have death rattles, or have procs when they take damage. But Shadowverse has like almost no cards like that. There are a couple Last Words cards for Shuttlecraft which could take additional damage as they spawned Last Words followers. But other than that, 1 damage 4 times or 4 damage all at once is really basically the same in this game. At least for now. So it is kind of curious wording. Overall, just a very basic ward, so we'll give it a 0. Next, Wandering Bard Elta, 2 mana 2/2, evolve. Followers and amulets Fanfare, Necromancy, Enhance, and Earthright abilities that activate upon being played from the hand will not activate. This effect lasts until this follower leaves the area. Note that Elta only gets +1/+1 when you evolve her, and her evolve is very specific. There aren't very many Fanfares, Necromancy, Enhance, or Earthright abilities that you can foresee. There are a couple of Necromancies and Earthrights that activate at the start of an opponent's turn, and if you see them on the board, then you can directly counter those with this card. But for the most part, your opponent is getting those when they play cards from their hand on their turn, so they'll just play some removal instead, kill Elta, and then play whatever they want anyway. Since this card requires an evolve and it takes a stat hit for the evolve. Gonna have to give it a -1. It is new tech, but I don't see it being very useful. Next up, Exfighter, 3 mana 2/3, enhance 6, gain +3/+3. A very vanilla card. Existing cards will perform better, so even though this does have some flexibility as a 3 and a 6 drop, overall -1. Next, Impartial Strix. No, not that Strix. That's better. Probably 0 people got that reference, but I'm fine with that. Impartial Strix, 4 mana 3/3, Fanfare, gain +2/+2 if you have at least 20 neutral cards remaining in your deck. Impartial Strix seems very partial to neutral cards, if I do say so myself. Clearly it's a Neutral-Craft card, but in a Neutral-Craft deck, Goblin Breaker Tina and Uriel are probably going to be the go-to 4-drop cards for that deck. If you needed even more 4-drops, then you could fit this in and it probably wouldn't be too bad, but simply by comparison, it's going to get an overall -1. Next, Ariette, Soothing Harpist, 7 mana 4/5, Fanfare, fully restore the defense of an allied follower that has attacked this turn, give it the ability to attack 1 more time. Typically I don't like expensive cards that buff followers that are already on the board from the previous turn, unless they're specifically designed as a mid-range finisher, and this card does have some combo potential as a mid-range finisher, but it really could use a good ambush follower to fully see that potential. It wouldn't be terrible if you played like a Ninja Master and evolved it on turn 6, and then played this for 12 damage to face on turn 7. It would be even better if there was a 6-drop ambush follower that was even better than Ninja Master, but as of right now there's not. It's not a terrible card though, so overall 0. And finally, Israfil, Legendary, 9 mana 8/8. Fanfare, restore 4 defense to your leader. Whenever this follower attacks, deal 2 damage to all enemies. This isn't bad as a Saha Kiel target. You get to pull her out, attack with it, and deal 2 damage to all enemies, and then she goes back in your hand to play again later. But for a 9-drop, she is a bit on the weak side. Pretty good body, okay effect, but for 9 mana you want to be ending the game, and she doesn't really do that. Overall -1. And that's all for now. Feel free to discuss the cards and share your own opinions in the comments below. Hope you all enjoyed the video. Please tune in again next time.